sisidlang basag, ating ilapag sa tulang ng Ama. Pagsaluhan natin ang luksa at damhin ang sugat ng bansa. At doon natin ipunla butil ng diwang mapagpalaya sa iisang habang ating itatag, ibangon, itindig sa dulang ng katotohanan, sa sahig ng katarungan. Doon natin ipagdiwang kapayapaan at pag-ibig. Sa iisang habang ating itatag ang pagkakaisa, ang sisidlang basag, ating ilapag sa tulang ng Ama. Pagsaluhan natin ang luksa at damhin ang sugat ng bansa. At doon natin ipunla butil ng diwang mapagpalaya sa iisang habag, ating itatag, ibangon, itindig sa dulang ng katotohanan, sa sahig ng katarungan. Doon natin ipagdiwang kapayapaan, pag-ibig.
Mary, help of Christians, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning, educators. This is Tina de Guzman from Don Bosco Press Incorporated. Welcome to SalesianaBooks Chalk Talk Online. SalesianaBooks Chalk Talk Online is an online teacher training program that Don Bosco Press provides for its partner schools. Today, we shall have a special Chalk Talk Online, and it is entitled Honoring History, a discussion on historical revisionism. Before we formally start, allow me to read some additional reminders for today's CTO. First, let us be polite and respectful at all times. Second, remember to think before you post and use only courteous words when giving your personal opinion on the topic and in pitching your questions. Third, the organizer of the webinar has the prerogative to remove from the webinar room anyone who we perceive to be not behaving accordingly. Let us all maintain a friendly, courteous, and professional atmosphere. May we all have a fruitful and knowledge-filled morning. I will no longer keep you waiting. Let us start. To formally welcome you and introduce our speaker, may I call in the Executive Director of Don Bosco Press, Inc., Brother Carmelo Martinez, STD. Good morning.
Thank you, Ma'am Tina. Good morning to all our participants. in this Chalk Talk online series brought to you by Don Bosco Press. To start our morning session, may I request you to answer this poll? Okay, I have this first poll this morning and it's asking you, how are you this morning? Okay, many are excited and happy. There are also those who feel nervous but there are also those who feel motivated and inspired. But majority of our participants this morning describe themselves as happy. So around 40%. Some are excited, inspired, nervous, motivated. Once again, welcome to this Chalk Talk online session entitled Honoring History, a Discussion on Historical Revisionism. As we welcome you to this seminar, we also thank you for choosing to spend your morning with us. We also acknowledge our speaker this morning, Dr. Maris Diokno, and we are truly grateful to her for saying yes to our invitation to share her expertise and insights through this forum. Usually, Don Bosco Press seminar season runs from sometime around May until August of each year with the aim of helping schools and educators prepare for the coming school year. We generally take a few weeks of rest and we resume our seminars again sometime in November until around February or March in order to promote our new products. Yes, you may say that this is an unusual seminar at an unusual time because we know that we are in an unusual situation. Given the many concerns that we are currently facing, the COVID-19 pandemic, the issues and controversies in the government, the seemingly inability of our leaders to address our more pressing problems, the blurring of our historical memory, among others, we felt that we cannot just let these issues and concerns pass us by. As educators, we cannot but respond proactively to the demands of our situation. Organizing this forum is one of our responses to the challenges we are facing. And we hope that through this discussion, we will be able to help equip our educators not only in being able to teach well history, but more importantly, I guess, in being able to teach what is true and honorable. I have another poll for us to answer. May we just know your location right now? So more or less, we'll have a picture of where our participants this morning are coming from. So the poll is up. Kindly identify, are you from region 1, 2, or 3, or region or NCR? Are you from region 4 or the Bicol region? Are you in Visayas right now? Okay. Yeah, there are participants coming from regions 1, 2, and the Cordillera Administrative Region, around 20%, a big number. Region 3, they're around 20% also. NCR, I think most of our participants, no, it's only around 35% of our participants are coming from NCR. Region 4 and Bicol area, Bicol region, around 14%. We have representatives from Davao region and around 8%. Yeah, we have also one participant from outside of the country. Welcome to this Chalk Talk online on honoring history. Thank you for answering that poll. I have one more poll for you this morning. If you may also identify your task or your responsibility in school this coming school year. Are you part of the school administration? Are you a social studies teacher? Are you a teacher of other subjects? Are you a researcher, a graduate student, or a non-teaching school personnel or others? Are you a historian? Okay. 60% of our participants our social studies teacher. Around 8% of our participants this morning are school administrators. 20% of our participants this morning are teachers of other subjects. There are also researchers in the group, and there are also those who identify themselves as others. Yeah, thank you for answering our poll. We hope that through this gathering and coming together, we will be able to learn, we will be able to reflect, and we will be able to raise questions. Questions about our history, about our past, but also about the many concerns and issues that we face today. As educators, we can only give what we have. We hope that this morning session will be both enriching and enjoyable for all of you. We hope too that you will be able to share with your students, your colleagues and friends the discussions and discoveries that we will have this morning. As I conclude, allow me to re-echo what our revered speaker this morning once said, and I quote, "At this moment in our history, every voice counts, and I wish to place mine on the side of history. The multitude of especially young Filipinos who have come out in defense of history and are prepared to co-author it for their generation and the future point to one clear realization. They, we all will guard our history." End of quote. Nawa, ang pakikisangkot natin sa diskusyong ito ngayong umaga ay maging isang katibayan na handa nga nating ipagtanggol ang ating kasaysayan sa sino mang magnanais burahin, palitan o sirain ito. Muli, maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo. Masaya po kaming makasama kayo ngayong umaga at pagpalain tayo ng poong may kapal. It is also my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker this morning, Dr. Maria Serena I. Jokno. Dr. Jokno is Professor Emeritus of History at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Her research interests are Philippine and Southeast Asian history and historiography. Aside from teaching at the UP History Department, she also taught graduate courses on social studies pedagogy at the UP College of Education. She has authored, edited, and co-authored several books, book chapters, and articles, and her recent researches on the Southeast Asian region dwell on peacemaking in Southeast Asia, public history, and the challenges of heritage conservation in the region. At present, Professor Jokno heads a 3-year research and publication project of UP about the Philippines from the 16th century to 1898. As the university's contribution to the commemoration of the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Ferdinand Magellan in the Philippines next year. The project expects to publish 4 volumes of original papers contributed by Filipino and foreign scholars. Professor Jokno's contribution to phase 1 of the project, 16th century to 1780s, is tentatively titled Of Church Bells and Pews, the Fiesta as a Reflection of Spanish Rule. So it's something we are looking forward to. In addition, Dr. Jokno and some colleagues are reviewing current social studies textbooks. Professor Jokno has also handled several administrative positions in UP Diliman. She became the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Associate Dean of the College of Social Science and Philosophy, Director of the Third World Studies Program, and Member-at-Large of the University Council Executive Committee, and Chair or Member of various university, college, and department committees throughout her academic career. She has also sat on governing and advisory boards of other educational institutions such as LaSalle Green Hills, Far Eastern University Public Policy Center, Loyola Schools of the Ateneo de Manila University, De La Salle Santiago Zobel School, and De La Salle University Manila, as well as in government educational institutions such as the Commission on Higher Education Technical Panel on General Education and Technical Subcommittee on History, and was a consultant on the Social Studies curriculum at the Department of Education. Professor Jokno also served in many international organizations as consultant, chair, and advisor of several committees and groups. She is also a recipient of several awards. Among them are the university's International Publication Awards for several years, UP Diliman Centennial Fellows, Outstanding Professional in Education by the UP Alumni Association, UP Diliman Outstanding Book Award for the 3-volume series Democracy and Citizenship in the Philippines, the Doña Aurora Aragon Quezon Peace Award. Likewise, she has been an honorary fellow of the Cairns Institute, James Cook University in Australia, and a recipient of the Outstanding History Award for her work in local history from the Historical Society of Morong Rizal. In 2011, Professor Jokno was appointed chairperson of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and during her term, the commission saw the modernization of the commission's 22 historical museums and the restoration of churches and other historical structures damaged by the 7.2 magnitude earthquake in 2013, primarily those located in the islands of Bohol and Cebu. However, she resigned from the commission in 2016 when the government buried Mr. Marcos at the Libingan ng mga Bayani. She returned to UP where she completed government service and is now Professor Emeritus of History in the said university. Without further ado, friends, let us welcome our speaker, Dr. Maria Serena I. Jokno.
Mel, okay ba? Nadidinig niyo naman ako?
Yes, Doc. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. So mag-uumpisa na tayo, no? Tungkol sa paksa na ating na inassign sa atin. I hope you can see my slides. Can you see my slide? All right. So I will begin. Basically, tatlo yung topics na tatalakayin natin. Unang-una, yung definition ng historical revisionism. Yung mga alam na yung definition, you can skip this while I briefly explain it. The second point is how do we identify historical revisionism. Tapos, dahil mga teacher tayo, ano yung mga kakayahan na kakailanganin natin, no, para ma-identify at matugunan itong historical revisionism. So, mag-umpisa tayo sa definition. Okay. Basically, dalawang uri ng historical revisionism. Yung una, yung tinatawag na positive revisionism. Ito yung trabaho ng mga historiador katulad ko. Pag meron kaming nababasa o nakikitang mali, yun ay aming niwawasto. So positive historical revisionism means that we correct a factual error, or halimbawa, meron kaming bagong na-discovering fact, let us say, meron tayong na-discovering sanggunian or source sa, let's say, sa Spanish archive na hindi pa nagagamit noon, na nagpapakita ng bagong pangyayari or maaring bagong interpretasyon ng nangyari. So that's positive historical revisionism. Siyempre, pag meron din tayong nakikitang mali, yun ay ating niwawasto. Nung chairman ako ng National Historical Commission, halimbawa, meron akong natatanggap na letters, halimbawa, merong nilagay na marker ang Historical Commission noon pa, tapos may napapansin ng community na mali, chine-check namin at kung mali, yun ay aming niwawasto. So that's called positive historical revisionism. Trabaho po ito ng mga historiador. I think the one that you want me to discuss more is what is called negative historical revisionism. Pag negative, ibig sabihin may distortion. The past is distorted. So I'm giving you two examples. All right, you will see on the screen, on one side, you see the inauguration of President Obama in 2009. The other is a photograph of the inauguration of President Trump 8 years later. So makikita natin, obviously, punong-puno yung inauguration ni President Obama, samantalang yung kay President Trump, mas maraming snow. Ano? Hindi? Oh, sorry. Okay, so what do I do? Sorry, you don't see it pala. Share. Okay, and then share. All right. Sorry, so hindi pala nyo nakikita, and there I was talking away. That's why I was asking. Anyway, okay, so basically this is what I want to talk about, 3 items. And I already discussed positive historical revisionism. Ito yung trabaho ng mga Ito yung trabaho ng mga historiador. Okay? What I think what you want me to discuss is the negative historical revisionism. Can you see my screen now? Can you see it? This is the problem when I don't get any feedback. Can you see my slide? All right. Okay. So, negative historical revisionism is a distortion of the past. What you see on your screen are two photographs. On one side, you see the photograph of the inauguration of President Obama in 2009. 8 years later, you see the inauguration of President Trump. As you can see, President Obama's inauguration had many more people. In President Trump's inauguration, mas maraming snow, yung puti, kaysa sa tao. Just the same, ano yung sinabi ni President Trump? My inauguration attracted, quote, a massive field of people. Sa estimation niya, 1 to 1.5 million people attended. At yung White House Press Secretary ni President Trump, nagsabi na Trump drew, quote, the largest audience ever, period. But according to the New York Times estimate, the crowd in Trump's inauguration was only about a third of Obama's 1.8 million. So this is an example. On the one hand, you minimize. On the other, you inflate. And why does negative historical revisionism attempt to do that? Because you want to justify something that you're doing in the present, or maybe some person has a not so good reputation and you want to revive that person's reputation and make it appear good or acceptable. Or you distort the past because you want to advance a particular political interest or perspective or agenda. In effect, the desired result is you either want to make the past look better than it actually was, or you want to make the present look better. I'll give you an example of revisionism in Europe before we look at our own. No? So there's he was well-known British historian by the name of David Irving. He wrote a lot about the Holocaust and the war in Germany, the rise of fascism and all. Until 1988, Irving admitted that the Holocaust had happened. But, for example, Jews, hindi naman talaga alam yan ni Hitler. But in 1998, he actually joined the camp of Holocaust deniers. And he said, as a matter of fact, there were no gas chambers in Auschwitz. He says that there were no gas chambers. Obviously, there were none. If you look at the photographs, ang natitira na lang ay yung mga chimney, because the Germans had blown up the chambers before they abandoned the camp. But anyway, sabi ni Irving, kung pumunta ka doon, makikita nyo, walang gas chamber, therefore no one was killed. And then in his books after that, Irving would not talk about the Holocaust at all. So in 1993, Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, who is a professor of modern Jewish and Holocaust studies at Emory University in the US, she published a book about the Holocaust deniers. And in that book, she called Irving, quote, a dangerous spokesperson for denying the Holocaust. Here you see the cover of her book. Irving got angry in 1996, 3 years after the publication. The historian Irving filed a suit of libel against Professor Lipstadt and the publisher, Penguin Books. Kasi sabi niya, naapektuhan daw ng kanyang hanap buhay, and people began to hate him because of the way Deborah Lipstadt portrayed him in the book. So Professor Lipstadt, in her defense, had to demonstrate that everything that she wrote in that book was accurate, was historically true. And of course, that Mr. Irving had distorted history. You will see the picture of the judge there, Charles Gray. He dismissed the libel suit. In other words, he did not find any basis for suing Professor Lipstadt or Penguin. The finding of Judge Gray. Sabi niya, the mistakes and misconceptions that he found in the work of Dr. Irving, of the historian David Irving, appear unlikely to have been innocent. In other words, sadya. No? They are more consistent with the willingness on Irving's part, knowingly, to misrepresent, manipulate, or put a spin on the evidence. Why? So that the evidence will conform with Irving's own preconceptions. So in the judgment of Judge Charles Gray, the statements and conclusions reached by Irving prove that he deliberately skewed the evidence to bring it into line with his political beliefs. Now, this is a classic example of negative historical revisionism, where you manipulate the evidence so that it fits your own political belief or your own political agenda. Now, let's take a look at why negative revisionism happens. Ngayon, mga guro tayo ng Araling Panlipunan, ano? Alam natin na iba-iba ang mga pampublikong gamit ng kasaysayan. You will see on the screen 3 basic reasons why. One, public use of history. Of course, we want human beings to develop a basic sense of humanity. Why do you get that from history? Because history is a narrative of human beings, of human societies. So when you understand the story of human beings, human societies, then you develop a basic sense of what it means to be a human person. The second public use of history is to promote citizenship and civic-mindedness. Makikita natin yan sa Araling Panlipunan curriculum. Laging lumalabas, lumilitaw itong pagkamamamayan, no? Pagiging miyembro ng isang lipunan. And then, of course, history is also used to form a collective identity, a sense of belonging to a larger community, usually to a nation. Kaya makikita natin, isang layunin ng Araling Panlipunan is the promotion of nationalism. But these public uses of history are affected by different factors. One factor, of course, is the political agenda of government, usually of government, because ang government ang nagdidikta ng curriculums sa public school system. And then another factor would be the educational thrust. And the third factor would be the influence of media. So let's take a look at each of these factors. Political agenda. Let me use the example, a current one of President Duterte. So in 2017 on National Hero Lapu-Lapu, sabi niya mismo yung NHCP wala daw kinikilala na Muslim hero, which is not true. NHCP has put markers in honor of Muslim leaders. Pero yung hero niya, si Lapu-Lapu, sa kanyang tingin, in all probability daw ay isang Muslim, kaya daw lumaban sa Espanya. Okay? So, that same year, the president created the Order of Lapu-Lapu. Now, presidents do this. An Order of Lapu-Lapu is an honor. Now, many presidents, they create honors. Later, I will show you other honors created in previous administrations. What is interesting about this particular order, na ginagamit ang pangalan ni Lapu-Lapu, it awards government and private individuals who render service not to the public or to society, but to an advocacy of the president. Particular to an advocacy of the president, not a service to the nation. And included in that EO, among the advocacies or campaigns of the president, would be the drug war and so on. Now, why am I citing this as an example? Take a look at the existing honors in the country. This is the honors code. in the order of their importance as laid out in the executive order in 2003. Quezon Service Cross, Order of Lacandula, and so on. Wala pa dyan, syempre, itong Order of Lapu-Lapu kasi bago lang yan. Now, take a look at the orders that are named after Philippine heroes. For example, you have Lacandula, Silang, and Gawad Mabini. Orders are for a service not rendered to promote the advocacy of the president, but to promote a service to the nation. For example, yung Order of Lacandula is the highest civilian order awarded for political and civic merit. Okay? It's named after Lacandula and it's dedicated to his leadership, prudence, fortitude, courage, resolve in the service of the people. So walang binabanggit na ito ay binibigay sa isang tao dahil pinopromote niya yung agenda ng Pangulo o ng administrasyon. Ito ay para sa isang serbisyong civic and political, no, named after King Lacandula. Order of Sikatuna. This is an order of diplomatic merit. So given to individuals who have rendered, quote, exceptional and meritorious services to the Republic of the Philippines. Not the campaign of any particular president or administration, but service to the Republic. Yung kay Gabriela Silang is given to spouses or heads of state, whether Filipinos or foreign. One recipient, for example, is Queen Sofia of Spain, who has put up a lot of civic projects here in the Philippines. And then the last one, Gawad Mabini, is given to diplomats or Filipinos who have rendered foreign service or promoted Filipino interests abroad. So I cite this as an example of how history can be used to promote a political agenda. Now, what about the educational thrust? Ito ay base sa ating saligang batas, ang nilalayo ng edukasyon sa Pilipinas. Makikita natin marami sa mga layuning ito ay may kinalaman sa araling panlipunan. Halimbawa, inculcate patriotism, nationalism, love of humanity, paggalang sa karapatang pantao, appreciation sa papel ng mga pambansang bayani, sa historical development ng ating bansa, pagkamamamayan, ethical values, personal discipline, critical and creative thinking. These are all goals and functions that directly relate to history and araling panlipunan. Now, the third factor, so I talked about the factors that affect the public uses of history. One would be a political agenda. The second would be the educational thrust. And the third would be the influence of media. Why? Well, because media is public. Okay, that's the purpose of media, to broadcast. Okay, the second concern would be the quality of content, and the third would be the speed in the spread of information. I put mis or malinformation, lalo na kung sa social media, marami tayong makikitang hindi makatotohanang impormasyon na ang bilis-bilis kumalat. Magbibigay tayo ng isang halimbawa. Nung lumabas itong column ni Rod Kapunan, kung saan sinasabi niya yung mga kung may question o humahamon sa paglibing kay Ginoong Marcos sa libingan ng mga bayani, ay wala daw karapatan mag-question dahil mismo si President Cory Aquino ay pumayag na ilibing ang presidential dog sa libingan ng mga bayani, complete with tombstone and military honors. Of course, this is false, okay? The dog, the name was Shadow, was not buried at libingan ng mga bayani. Nilibing ang aso sa Malacanang Park, doon sa tabi ng PSG, sa Malacanang Palace, hindi sa libingan ng mga bayani. But in any case, kahit na false, ito ay lumabas noong August 13. 2 days later, lumabas na ito sa social media. Cory allowed a presidential dog to be buried in libingang mga bayani but opposed Marcos burial. That same day, that was on August 15, that same day, sa Facebook ng Rodrigo Duterte, my president, yun na naman. Aso ni dating Pangulong Aquino, nakalibing sa libingan. False. The next day, another social media account with the same photograph, the same item. And on September 1, again the same item, another social media account, Duterte Warriors, with the same thing. So I use this as an example to show to you how quickly false information can spread, especially online. Okay, so what are the basic issues in the public uses of history? As I try to demonstrate, the first is the validity of the claims made. Are the claims that are presented to the public valid, accurate, truthful, factual? And of course, the second issue is kung paano ginagamit. Ginagamit ba itong claim na ito to serve a political purpose or to serve propaganda? That's why it has been said that control over history is tantamount to control over the public mind, because when you control history, you are able also to control a particular point of view. You are able to use history to appeal to emotion, to promote a particular political purpose. And usually this control is directed by government, because government controls the curriculum, and government also has a say in can influence, let's put it that way, how media makes its presentations to the public. The finest example we have now is the denial of the franchise of ABS-CBN. No? Okay. How is history revised negatively, and for what purpose? So I want to use as one example the Official Gazette, which is a government arm. This is an official arm of the government. It is where all government documents are kept. No? All right. So on September 11, in 2016, the Official Gazette came out on the occasion of the birth anniversary of the President Marcos, came out with this statement on its Facebook page. First paragraph, no problem. Factual. 99th birthday, yung career ni Ginoong Marcos, kinatawan siya ng ikalawang distrito ng Ilocos Norte, tapos naging senador, tapos naging Senate President, tapos naging ikasampung Pangulo ng Republika. So walang problema. Factual. The concern arose with the second and third paragraphs, because the second paragraph says, in 1972, dineklara ang batas militar to suppress a communist insurgency and secessionism in Mindanao. That is a claim of Mr. Marcos. Okay, he claims that is why he declared martial law. But that is not necessarily the reason why martial law was declared. That is Mr. Marcos's version. And if you look at the third paragraph, Mr. Marcos stepped down from the presidency. You know, when you use the term step down, that usually means willingly. Why did he step down? To avoid bloodshed. So magpasalamat pa tayo, because he wanted to avoid bloodshed during the uprising that came to be known as people power. Now, nung lumabas ito sa Facebook, nagalit ang mga netizens. Sabi nila, bakit nire-revise ang history? Isang version lang ang pinapakita. So because of that, ang ginawa ng Official Gazette on the same day, 21 minutes, I suppose, after this one came, or I don't know exact time, lumabas ang version 2. Version 2 was exactly the same as version 1. Ito lang ang tinanggal. Avoid bloodshed. That was all. They deleted. Everything else was the same. Of course, netizens were still not contented. So, comment sa Facebook. So, napilitan ng Official Gazette maglabas ng version 3. This is all in the same day, on September 11. pangatlong version. Anong ginawa nila? Tinanggal na nila yung ikalawa at ikatlong talata kasi yun ang pinaka-contentious. Ni-retain nila yung unang paragraph na nakita natin kanina, walang problema, ngunit, dinagdag nila itong pangungusap. He was the longest serving president of the country for almost 21 years. Now, this is a very strange or unbelievable statement because alam naman natin walang konstitusyon sa mundo na pumapayag sa isang pangulo na magsilbi for more than 2 decades. Unless it's a dictatorship. But normally, constitutions anywhere in the world impose a fixed and limited term. So again, the netizens challenged that. So version 3 came out on September 11, kawawa naman ng official gazette, because they finally came out with version 4 on September 12. I think this was about about so many minutes after midnight. Okay, so September 12 na officially. Now, they copied the same as version 3, but added after the longest serving president, yon, declaring martial law in 1972, then went to exile in the US at the height of the People Power Commission, and he was succeeded by President Aquino. So, netizens still commented because when you say went to exile, it implies you voluntarily or willingly entered, went into exile. Now, the official gazette, because of tremendous pressure from netizens, had to issue this statement about its role. Sabi nila, the official gazette is the repository of documents. By law, that is the function of the official gazette. When they say repository, they mean you only convey kung ano yung nakasulat and you update. Siyempre, dadagdagan mo because more EOs, more proclamations, or whatever are issued, so you have to keep updating and laws are made. So they said the official gazette is not in the business of revising history. Okay? Wala daw silang political color. Ang layunin lamang nila ay historical accuracy. But as the previous slides showed, their previous Facebook posts showed, this was not exactly the case. So this is one example of how history can be revised negatively. Now, another example is I would like to use here the decision of the Supreme Court in the Libingan ng Mga Bayani case where some petitioners, some citizens petitioned the Supreme Court not to allow the burial of Mr. Marcos sa Libingan ng Mga Bayani. Tingnan natin yung desisyon ng Korte Suprema. The ponente, Associate Justice Peralta, said, to move on is not to forget the past. It is to focus on the present and the future, leaving behind what is better left for history to ultimately decide. There are certain things that are better left for history, not this court to adjudge. Okay? So, when we ask ourselves, why is history revised negatively? Earlier, we saw one was to create a myth. Here, you revise it negatively because you want to move on from the past. Okay? In the meantime, the country must move on. Let the issue rest. So ang sinabi ng court, okay, we will just follow the law. The law doesn't say na bawal, sabi ng majority. So let history judge. Meanwhile, chill lang tayo. Chill. Now, there is another vision of moving on. This time, it was issued by the palace spokesman in 2017 during the EDSA commemoration. Sabi ng palace spokesman at the time, Ernesto Abella, don't get stuck in the past. That's another version of moving on. Sabi niya, time to move on from the past, okay? But move on to what? Well, to nation building, to something more positive, a more positive outlook, a more positive understanding. So you remember my earlier slide where I said that history is revised because you want to make the past look better, look nicer, look more positive. Or you want the present to look more positive, more acceptable. Now, why else is history revised? This time, iba naman. The Supreme Court said to move on is not to forget. Okay? But here, you have President Duterte telling the Wallace Business Forum dinner in Malacanang Palace on December 12, 2016, for those who cannot forget, you are condemned to enjoy your grief until you die. He was referring here to the Marcos burial. Okay, as you can see in the next paragraph. So we get conflicting signals. This issue rests, think of here from the president himself, forget. Otherwise, you will grieve. Until your death. But there is still another one. Think of something positive, forget. But now, they want us to remember. Noong 2017, there was a proclamation, what you call a local holiday sa Ilocos Norte, na gawing special holiday yung birth anniversary ni Ginoong Marcos, 100th birthday niya yon. And more recently, itong 2020, majority of the legislators sa House of Representatives, 197, approved a bill. Hindi pa siya batas kasi hindi pa naman ito napapasa sa Senado. Pero 197 congressmen and women approved this bill that would declare the 11th of September of every year nationwide, every year in Ilocos Norte, the Ferdinand Edralin Marcos Day. Okay, I just want to mention that it took the Congress only 44 days to approve this bill, but the Free Mass Testing Act, the Free COVID Testing Act of 2020 has been languishing in the House for more than 3 months since its filing. So here what they want us, first they said move on, they asked us to forget, now they want us to remember and honor. And finally, you have a fifth version naman, to erase. What do they want to erase? The memory of, in this case, Senator Ninoy Aquino. So, noong 1987, pinasa ng Kongreso, ng Legislatura, House and the Senate, yung Republic Act 6639, which renamed Manila International Airport Ninoy Aquino International Airport. But a few months ago in the House, this bill was filed renaming the airport. In other words, tatanggalin ang pangalan ni Senator Aquino. So it is to erase the memory. All right. What are the effects of these kinds of actions? One is what you might call historical amnesia. It's actually selective amnesia. There are heroes you want to forget, like Ninoy Aquino, and there are heroes you want to remember. Heroes, I say in quote, like let's say Mr. Marcos. Okay? The second effect is you create this myth of a hero, which appears in this cartoon by Docnet or William Billones, after the decision of the Supreme Court and the burial. So now, Mr. Marcos might be referred to as a hero. In fact, the daughter herself said in an interview with Karen Davila, slip of the tongue, all we want is a hero's, is soldier's burial. Okay, so let's look more closely at how negative historical revisionism actually operates. There are 3 ways, okay? One, it is built on a partial truth. Hindi naman siya totally fake. I mean, meron. Pero yung totally fake, so obvious. Except meron pa rin naniniwala, no? Katulad nung presidential dog na nilibing daw sa libingan. That's totally fake. Some, unfortunately, believed it. But generally, the more effective negative historical revisionism is built on a partial truth. Now, partial truth means also fake. Because truth cannot be part true and part false. Truth must be true completely, 100%. Okay? Sometimes, negative historical revisionism also is built on a selective context. The second way by which historical revisionism works is through the use of words, and I will give you examples of each. And the third is through ad hominem arguments. The best example of an ad hominem argument I have found was in 2016. Lumabas ito sa isang Facebook post, no, after nilibing si Ginoong Marcos sa libingan. So, sabi ng isang adult, galit na galit siguro sa mga bata, no? Galit na galit ka, wala ka naman nung martial law. At ang sagot naman ng kabataan, ikaw, tuwang-tuwa ka sa Pasko, wala ka naman dun sa Bethlehem. In other words, this is an ad hominem argument. We all know you do not need to have experienced the past in order to know it. That's why we study history. I mean, like, I was not born when Magellan came in 1521, but I know that he came to the Philippines. And I was not born during World War II, but I know that World War II, a Japanese occupation took place. So this is an ad hominem argument. The second example I have, twisting facts through words. For example, sinabi doon sa official gazette, Marcos stepped down from the presidency. Okay, look at how words change the meaning. Pag sabihin mong step down, pareho ba yon sa was ousted from, was removed from, left the presidency, gave up the presidency? Okay? In other words, you will see that with every change of word, you also change the meaning of the fact. The second example, Marcos went into exile. You mean was forced into exile? He opted to go into exile? Or he ran away to the US? Or he escaped to the US? That would be another example. And the third way is what we call partial truth. This is a medyo personal example. It concerns my father, who was arrested during martial law in 1972. Nung panahong yon siya ay senador at inaresto siya about the same time na hinuli din si Senator Ninoy Aquino. So itong 2018, lumabas si Juan Ponce Enrile sa isang interview na sinabi niya, quote, the late Pepe Diokno, my father, didn't want to be released. I told him, Pepe, just sign anything and just get out of here, I told him. Now, when we read this, my family, among other things, was rather upset because parang pinalalabas niya that my father was just being petty, that he was trying to be, silly. He didn't want to be released. Fortunately, my father, right after his release, filed a petition with the Supreme Court in which he detailed in detail everything that took place in that instance that Enrile referred to. And my father is one of these unusual individuals who had a photographic memory. Unfortunately, hindi ko nakuha, but Dad had a photographic memory. Everything, even the conversations, the questions, he wrote them all down. And he submitted that because the Marcos media, after his release, portrayed his release as appearing to accept martial law. So sumagot siya. Sinagot niya yon and he filed that. So I have a copy of that. And he said, this is what the Pledge of Allegiance said. They really wanted my father to sign this pledge, where he would promise not to perform any act that would violate martial law proclamations and orders, okay? And moreover, that he would squeal that he would by who violated this pledge. So my father said, I'm not going to sign that. We were all present, no? My siblings and I with my mother, nandun po kami. So my father said, hindi ko pipirmahan yan. Unang-una, hindi ko kinikilala ang legality ng batas militar. Hindi ko tinatanggap yung legalidad ng mga proklamasyon, lahat ng mga dekreto, etc., na in-issue ni Pangulong Marcos based on martial law. So why will I sign a Pledge of Allegiance that will require me to accept that? So just to clarify, it was a partial truth because what Enrile said was Dad did not want to be released. False. He objected to the Pledge of Allegiance. He never objected to his release. Syempre, he wanted to be released, di ba? Ilang taon na siya nasa jail. We would visit him. That was 2 years. Okay? So here is an example of a partial truth. Another example of a partial truth can come from a textbook. This is a current textbook. Hindi ko na lang sinulat yung may akda at yung pamagat. But it's a textbook that is being used in a private school, I think. Pinaliliwanag nito yung mga pangyayari, this is a direct quote, ang mga pangyayaring nagbigay daan sa pagdeklara ng batas militar. These 4 reasons, interestingly, are the reasons of Mr. Marcos. Okay? Those were the reasons that Mr. Marcos cited for justifying his imposition of martial law. So mga kilos protesta. But if you look at the textbook, hindi niya pinaliliwanag kung bakit may protesta. Ang tao ba, para ba siyang siraulong lalabas lang dyan sa kalye for no reason? For sure, there is a reason why people go out. What are they protesting about? Dapat ipaliwanag yon. Second, suliranin sa mga komunista at armadong grupo nito. What I find very interesting is this fact. Nung itinatag ang Communist Party at NPA noong 1969, siguro ang bilang ng mga fighters nila wala pang 60, halos 60 lang. But in the peak of martial law, 26,000. Umabot sa 26,000. So, kung sasabihin natin, yan ang nagbigay daan sa deklarasyon ng martial law, bakit dumami pa during martial law? Di ba dapat kung yan ang dahilan, dapat nung panahon ng martial law, sumpuin, sumonte. In fact, dumami. Suliranin sa mga armadong Muslim, the textbook simplifies the cause, which I think is unfair. No, points to the cause as simply the migration of Christians to Mindanao. So nawalan daw ng livelihood ang mga Muslim. I think that's a very simplistic explanation of the Muslim issues, of the issues that Muslim Filipinos have. No? And then karahasan sa pamahalaan. Ito yung medyo weird talaga kasi dalawa yung karahasan na pinupoint ng book eh. Yung isa yung pagbomba sa Plaza Miranda na hindi naman nakatarget kay Ginoong Marcos kung hindi sa oposisyon sa Liberal Party at saka yung attempt at ambushing, yung ambush kay Secretary Enrile na makikita natin, I will point to this later, ay questionable. Now, the textbook does not tell you, for example, that as early as 1969, may balak na si Ginoong Marcos na ideklara ang martial law. Ano yung ating pruweba? Nagbigay siya ng isang talumpati sa Philippine Military Academy as early as 1969 kung saan tinalakay niya yung kanyang plano, no, na nag-iisip-isip siya to declare martial law. So that was cooking as early as then. And then, now, what about selective content? Another example. Okay, if you look at the textbook, dinidiscuss sa section on martial law, ano yung mga programa ng martial law. In-explain lang, ginamit yung acronym na that was used by the New Society established by Mr. Marcos, PLEDGES. And each one was simply enumerated. No explanation as to the effectiveness, the purpose of these programs. Okay? Ano ba yung limitasyon ng mga program? Nilista lang ng textbook yung layon. Hindi naman natin alam kung nakamit yung mga layoning yon or hindi pinaliwanag. Kung paano inimplementa itong mga programa, paano sila tinanggap, kung yan ba ay naging mabisa, at ano ang naging epekto nito sa bansa at sa mga komunidad. So ang resulta nito, no, kung babasahin natin yung textbook, ipapa-enumerate lamang sa mga estudyante sa test at the end. O ano yung mga programa ng martial law? Pledges. Ayan. Memorize ng bata yung pledges. P stands for peace and order. L stands for and so on, so on. So ang mangyayari dito, mini-memorize, pero walang pagsusuri, walang malalim na pag-uunawa sa mga programang ito at sa mga issue, no, surrounding these programs. Yung dating DepEd textbook, bago mag K-12, so this is an old textbook before K-12 sa grade 5, pinaliwanag nito yung 1973 Constitution ng martial law. So ito yung main features. I just summarized this from the textbook, no? Kung ano yung mga major provisions ng 1973 na saligang batas. So nagkaroon ng parliamentary form of government, may batasang pambansa, unicameral, hindi katulad ngayon, bicameral, dinagdag ang bilang ng miyembro ng Korte Suprema, itinayo ang Sandigang Bayan, Ombudsman, and so on. But, what does the textbook not say? The textbook does not tell you that that same constitution allowed the president to continue to make law even if there was a legislature. Okay? And that provision is contained in the same constitution. But the textbook is totally silent. The textbook also doesn't tell us that Mr. Marcos had a provision in that constitution that enabled him to control all government officials and employees. That textbook also does not say that Mr. Marcos controlled the judiciary totally. How did he control the judiciary? Section 10 of the Constitution says that the Supreme Court may remain in office until they reach the age of 70 or unless sooner replaced by the president. Okay? And then that same Constitution expanded military courts and even gave military courts jurisdiction over civilians in certain cases. That was unthinkable before. Even now, bawal yan. Military court is for military men. Civilian courts are for civilian citizens. So again, this is an example of a partial truth. It tells you only one side of the Constitution, and it is silent. It says nothing about other aspects of the Constitution. So when you read the 1973 Constitution based on the textbook, maganda pala ito. Kasi yun lang ang side na pinapakita. All right, so going now into the pedagogical aspects of the negative historical revisionism. If you look at the curriculum ngayon sa Araling Panlipunan, I got this from the DepEd document. The last unit of the curriculum contains, this is from the last unit, contains this content. So yung mga suliranin at hamon sa kalayaan, nakikita na natin dito na binago na yung content ng curriculum. So ano na yung mga hamon sa kalayaan? So kung paano hinamon ng batas militar ang kalayaan and karapatan ng mga Pilipino. The second major part is yung mga protesta. Kung ano yung mga pakikibaka upang makamit natin muli ang ating kalayaan. So this is the content of the new textbook supposed to be. But as the examples I showed you point out, it all depends on how these are explained. Yung accuracy of the content. Is the content factual? And nowadays, you can go to a fact checker. There are several reliable fact checkers. Or me, I always prefer to do the research myself. No, this is the historian's training. And then The second question is the author's interpretation or conclusion based on evidence? You know, in history is like law. Everything is based on evidence. So kung merong bibigkasin, kailangan ipakita ng historiador yung kanyang ebidensya. You know, yung mga estudyante ko sa history, lagi kong pinaliliwanag, hindi nyo maintindihan kung bakit may obsession ang mga historiador sa footnote. Yung footnote no yun, ang siyang nagpapatunay ng sources ng historian. Sinasabi namin sa reader, hindi namin invento ito. Nakuha namin ito tapos isa-cite namin sa footnote lahat ng mga sources na ginamit namin, pinagkunan namin ng impormasyon or ng pagtingin or ng ebidensya. And there are 4 qualities of evidence. It must be sufficient. In other words, sapat siya upang gumawa ng isang konklusyon. So kung sabihin, halimbawa, galit siya sa akin. O, paano mo alam? Ano yung iyong ebidensya? Ayaw niya akong kausapin. O, ano pa? Yun lang. Well, malay mo, ayaw kang kausapin. Maaring sa puntong yon na kinakausap mo, busy siya. Nanonood siya ng TV. Meron siyang tinetext sa kanyang cellphone. So, maraming ibang dahilan na magpapaliwanag kung bakit ayaw kang kausapin. Not necessarily na dahil galit siya sa iyo. So, kailangan sapat, adequate ang ebidensya upang makabuo ng konklusyon. The second criterion or quality, substantial. In other words, solid, firm ang evidence, no? Solido. Hindi yung very flimsy, haka-haka. No, substantial itong ebidensya na ito. Third is authoritative. Authoritative means yung witness, yung testigo, or yung source na ginamit mo, no, alam niya yung kanyang pinag-uusapan. I'll give you an example. You know, in Wikipedia, may isang Scots Wikipedia. Scots Wikipedia is written, supposed to be in the Scottish language. So it talks about the Scottish language and everything, how it is developed, blah, blah, blah. Only recently, after I think 12 years or more, they discovered that the one who has been editing the Scots Wikipedia is a person who does not speak the language. And that he was a teenager who started to do this when he was 12 years old or something like that, about that young age. Obviously, a person like that is not authoritative. So by authoritative, ibig sabihin natin isang source na may credentials or is qualified to speak about it. Okay. Even among historians, you know, sometimes when I'm asked to speak, I'm invited to speak about a topic, I say, what topic is that? I say, you know, I know a historian who is better qualified to speak about that subject kasi yan talaga yung research niya. And I recommend that person. Why? Because I think that person would be more authoritative since yun ang kanyang area of specialization. Fourth quality is credible. Credible means reliable. Okay? Kapani-paniwala. So, ginagamit natin itong mga criteria na ito upang makabuo ng konklusyon, upang masabi kung yung binabasa natin or yung sinasabi sa dyaryo or saan man ay factual, ay totoo, ay accurate. So if you look at these, for example, I got this from different textbooks that are used today in some private schools. Sinabi niya, referring to Marcos, ang pagpapataw ng batas militar ang tanging paraan upang mailigtas ang republika sa kaguluhan. Ipinahayag ng Pangulo na adhika niyang palitan ng lumang lipunan na balot ng katiwalian, kaguluhan, kawalan ng disiplina, etc. etc. Nagkaroon ng ilang magandang pagbabago, subalit labis na natabunan ng mga ito ng hindi magandang epekto ng batas militar. Sinamantala ni Marcos ang kapangyarihan upang isulong ang kanyang personal na pangarap. So, sa unang tingin, masasabing na balik ng kapayapaan, kaayusan, etc. Ngunit nang lumaon, ang pagbibigay ng mas malawak na pangyarihan ay natulak sa mga nasa posisyon na abusuhin ito. Now, each of these is a statement that must be proven with evidence. Hindi pwedeng magsalita ng ganito lamang and then you end it with a period. Kailangan ang bawat pangungusap na ito, no, sundan ng ebidensya. Ebidensya na sapat, na substantial, na authoritative, na kapani-paniwala. Okay? This is how we historians would judge the content. Here's an example. If you want to look at the sources, this is just a brief excerpt because this comes from the source herself.
I was to leave the palace now. And while all of these things were spread, paintings, jewelry galore, money so much, because it was cash and all of that, I started giving away the money to the guards and all of it. And anybody who was there, great quantities of money, because these were money to pay off the printing, the election cost and all of that. And it was underneath the bedroom of ours in Malacanang. I opened the vault. There were 40, 50 suitcases of Louis Vuitton jewelry. All of these valuable paintings and all. What did I take? Got diapers and bottles and milk for the kids, for my grandchildren. In fact, some of the diamonds and all the jewelry that was in the dressing table, I just pushed to the diapers. And all I got finally was something, a diamond 11-carat ring that he gave me when he was, when we got married, and a 70-carat diamond ring. That's why in the custom it said, the Marcoses came in with diamonds and diapers and diamonds.
Okay, so makikita natin, this is a film from the US Customs. At dito pinapakita nila lahat ng nilalaman dahil na dinala nung pamilyang Marcos nung tumakbo sila sa Hawaii. Yung sinasabi ni Ginang Marcos na ang dala lang daw niya ay diapers at yung gatas para sa kanyang mga apo ay hindi totoo. If you look at the side there, the LA Times reported that the family arrived with more than $7.7 million in cash and valuables. One Burmese ruby was worth $290,000. One diamond-studded suklay hair comb was worth $44,410 US. Altogether, the gems, the jewelry were valued at some $4 million US. So these are facts, no? That historians look at as proof of the statements that we want to make, whether in textbooks or in historical works. Another example would be the war record of Mr. Marcos. I can speak about this kasi at that time, ako yung tagapangulo ng Pambansang Komisyong Pangkasaysayan ng Pilipinas o National Historical Commission. Nung kampanya, binanggit that time ni Candidate Duterte na ang dahilan kung bakit niya ipalilibing si Ginoong Marcos sa libingan ng mga bayani ay dahil siya ay isang sundalo. So ang ginawa ng NHCP, nung nalaman namin na siya na yung nanalo, quickly we did the research, tiningnan namin yung record ni Ginoong Marcos bilang sundalo. Tatlong aspeto ang tiningnan namin, yung kanyang mga medalya, yung kanyang rangko, yung kanyang guerrilla unit. So unang tiningnan namin yung kanyang mga biography. Importante dito yung tinatawag nating sanction. Ibig sabihin, these were biographies that Marcos himself approved. Alright? Biographies about himself, approved. And these are the biographies that we looked at. The fourth one, Marcos of the Philippines, is just a repeat of the third one. Hartzell Spence's Marcos of the Philippines. Kaya lang ang publisher ng the fourth biography was the government. The second set of documents we looked at were, this is very interesting. You know, this set of documents, hindi yan available noon. These were all classified documents classified in the US by the US government. But sometime in the 1980s or 90s, I don't know the exact date. These documents were declassified, and then they were transferred to the US National Archives, kept the US Library of Congress, where they could be accessed. Of course, the problem is, we are not living in Washington, we are not in the US Library of Congress. Paano natin magagamit itong mga dokumento? Fortunately, the Philippine Veterans Office under PVAO, Philippine Veterans Administration Office, under the Department of National Defense, was able to get into an agreement with the US National Archives to digitize all the documents relating to Philippine veterans during World War II. And doon namin nakita ang mga dokumentong may kinalaman sa war record ni Ginoong Marcos. As I said, kung hindi ito dinownload ng PVAO sa kanilang website, and you can check it, I put the website addresses for you to look at, hindi namin ma-access. We would have had to fly to Washington to go to the archives to read them. Just some quick examples. If you look at the medals, for example, base sa mga biographies ni Ginoong Marcos, sabi doon siya ang pinaka-decorated, valor-cited warrior, page 123 of Spence. Bago man siya dumating nakaabot sa edad na 25, he had won more medals for bravery than anyone in the Philippines. And by the end of the war, he had something like 27 medals. Actually, if you read the biographies, they're even more exciting than what you see there. In one, it says that Mr. Marcos single-handedly ambushed an entire company of Japanese soldiers. He killed 40, apat na po. Single-handed siya, ha? He killed 40 and he was able to turn back the rest. And in the process of that fight, naagaw daw niya yung isang samurai sword. At yung samurai sword ay niregaluhan niya kay General Douglas MacArthur, at yung sword na yun naman ay niregaluhan ni Douglas MacArthur kay US President Franklin Roosevelt noong 1944. I'm just getting that from the biography. That's not me saying it. Okay. Now, when we looked at the war records that we were able to get from the US government, Philippine Veterans Office from the US government, this document, ang mga maharlika, is very interesting. This is not very long. It's something about 40 pages, typewritten. Walang author, walang date, but I think it was written maybe in the night after the war or shortly towards the end, 1945. And although it has no author, we know the author is Mr. Marcos, because every page, it refers to Mr. Marcos in the third person. If you look at the first line here, Captain Ferdinand E. Marcos, no, always refers to him in the third person. However, when you get to page 27, sorry, it's not 40 pages, it's a 29-page document. When you get to page 27, in the first paragraph, the sentences refer to Mr. Marcos as I. So may slip of the tongue, I. After that, it goes back to the third person. So for all intents and purposes, this was written by him. Anyway, if you look at this document, nakasulat dito na Mr. Marcos received the Distinguished Service Cross, he received the Silver Star, and he received the Order of the Purple Heart. In fact, in one of his biographies, Mr. Marcos claims that he received the Distinguished Service Cross from General Douglas MacArthur himself while Marcos was in a foxhole. I cannot imagine that MacArthur would go down into the foxhole and then in the middle of all the war award him with a Distinguished Service Cross. But that's what's the claim. That's the claim in the biography. But if in the confidential telegram that was written by the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines in 1966. At that time, Mr. Marcos was going to the US for a state visit. Nirecommend niya that bigyan si Marcos ng 2 medals because he had never received the Distinguished Service Cross. Marcos claimed he had. But the US ambassador wrote the US State Department. Pagpunta ni Marcos dyan, bigyan nyo naman siya ng Distinguished Service Cross because he had never received it. What was the reply of the U.S. State Department on September 8, 1966. We have determined that Army ready and willing, go ahead with presentation, Distinguished Service Cross and Silver Medals, on the basis that U.S. Army records do not, repeat, not show he ever received them. So in the 1940s, mid to late 1940s, Mr. Marcos claimed that he had received these medals. 20 years later, the U.S. State Department said they had never given it. But if you want, you can check the websites of these medals, and you will find the names of all the Filipinos who received these medals. Mr. Marcos does not appear among them. Tungkol naman sa rangko, we found this document dated March 24, 1948, by Captain, worked with the headquarters of the command. And he says Mr. Marcos was a major as of 12 November 1944 up to the date of his discharge. Okay, major. However, in Ang Mga Maharlika, Mr. Marcos claimed that as of June 15, 1944, he assumed the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Okay? And in the Libingan ng Mga Bayani case, the Office of the Solicitor General presented an affidavit of Mr. Marcos's Philippine Army personnel form. It's not very clear, but if you look at the upper right column, this is what it shows. You can see original rank, 3rd Lieutenant, original rank, 15 November 1941. 1st Lieutenant, he got that on 10 February 1942. If you scroll down, you will see Lieutenant Colonel on 1 January 1944. Earlier, the claim of Mr. Marcos was in June 14, 1944. Here, it's 1 January 1944. If you scroll down this document, you will see at the bottom that he was a major from January 1945 to January 1951 as a guerrilla. See, the problem is, he claims USAFE rank, may guerrilla rank. The problem is that what the American government recognized, well, what Mr. Marcos wanted to be recognized was his guerrilla rank, but what Mr. Marcos wanted to be recognized was his guerrilla unit, Ang Mga Maharlika, which the United States government never recognized. Okay, so if you look at this document signed by Mr. Marcos on August 1, 1945, he signs it as Lieutenant Colonel. Okay. Another document signed on May 18, 1945, he signs it as Major. So in 17 days, he demotes himself. So this is the record of his ranks, depending on the sources. Captain Curtis, sabi niya Major. AFP 1996 certification was Major and then Captain. Then sa affidavit form ni Mr. Marcos, Lieutenant Colonel and Major. Ang Mga Maharlika, Lieutenant Colonel. And then another memo, Lieutenant Colonel, signed by him. Another memo signed by Mr. Marcos, Major. So, which rank? We maintain it was the rank of Major, and I was also told by former Secretary, DILG Secretary Alunan, that that was the rank that Marcos was going to be given honors for if he had been buried in Batak, as per their agreement with President Ramos. Okay, so we look at the quality of the content, the accuracy of the content. We also look at the credibility of the author. You know, sa kasaysayan, we always start with the question, sino yung sumulat? Sino yung source? Hindi kami nag-uumpisa sa ano yung sinulat. Lagi na kami nagtatanong, sinong nagsabi? Sino yung sumulat nun? Why? First, gusto naming malaman, bakit kaya sinulat ng may akda ito? At para kanino niya sinulat? Pangalawa, gusto rin naming malaman, itong may akda na ito, authoritative ba siya? Did he know or she know what he or she was talking about? And finally, and most important, we want to evaluate the author's account. Okay? Mapaniniwalaan ko ba ito? Mapagtitiwalaan ko ba ang account ng taong ito? Because we know that that source is a creation of a person. So is this person trustworthy? So I want to use an example of of Enrile's version of martial law. Okay. In 2018, sabi niya in his interview, very few were arrested during martial law. Tapos nirelease naman. They were inconvenienced for a while. Now, I emphasize this because, you know, in history, when you use these terms, very few, inconvenienced, a while, these terms have relative meanings. Yung very few sa kanya, maaring marami sa atin. Halimbawa, 5,000, baka sa kanya few lang yon. Sa atin, marami na yon. Inconvenience, ma-detain. My father was detained, arrested, imprisoned for 2 years. Was that an inconvenience? During those 2 years, they burned his law office. By the time we got there, after the curfew, sunog na. He was never interrogated. He was never charged. He was released. Was never told why he was arrested. Is that a mere inconvenience? And then for a while, ano yung a while? 1 day? 5 years? 3 years? Then sinabi din niya, these are direct quotes, name me one person that was arrested because of political or religious belief. Sabi niya, name me one person. Name me one person that was arrested simply because he criticized President Marcos. None. Well, my family wrote him, we answered him, and we said, well, we can name one, our father. O, tapos na, one. Sabi niya, okay. And then, he said, during martial law, wala daw massacre. Katulad ng Mendiola massacre nung panahon ni President Cory Aquino. No massacres. These were the massacres during martial law. September 1974, Malisbong massacre in Sultan Kudarat. 1,500 killed inside the mosque. 300 houses sinunod. November 1977, Bingul Village massacre. In June 1981, Daet massacre in Camarines Norte. 4,000 marchers were shot at, 4 were killed, many others were injured. Sagod massacre in northern Samar, 45 were killed. Escalante massacre in Negros, 20 were killed. So it's hard to say no massacre when historically we can prove that these massacres took place. Now, when I say credibility of the author, let's look at this author. This was a man who in 1972, on 22 September said, inambush siya. Lumabas yan sa dyaryo. Makikita nyo dyan yung news article kung saan ipinakita na inambush si Enrile. An incident that Marcos used to declare martial law. How do we know that? Here is an excerpt from Marcos's diary dated September 22 at 9:55 p.m. Nakasulat dito, Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile was ambushed near Wakwak at about 8 p.m. It was a good thing he was riding in his security car as a protective measure and so on. Now pay attention. This, okay, makes the martial law proclamation a necessity. So, ginamit. That was 1972. 1986, okay, on 22 February, sa Ministry of National Defense sa EDSA, sinabi ni Ginoong Enrile, hindi daw totoo yung ambush. Nag-retract siya. Finake daw nila yan para ma-justify ang martial law, and you can read that in the official gazette. And in 2012, in his memoir that was launched on September 27, Enrile retracted his retraction. Now he says the ambush was real. So in a span of 3 decades, the man changed his mind 3 times. It happened, it did not happen, and it happened. Is that source credible? From a historian's point of view, the credibility of such a source would become questionable because of the change of mind. In fact, this is not from mine, but I got this from the Facebook post of Gideon Lasco. He details the 9 lives of Enrile. I just put those dates. Pro-Marcos, then he became anti-Marcos, pro-Cory, then anti-Cory, pro-ERAP, became anti-GMA, Senate President, plunder suspect because of the scams of PDAF, and then pro-Marcos, he defends martial law. and he calls himself a witness to history. Okay? So, I would like to end this session, because I know I've talked too long, with the pedagogical dimension of competencies. Tiningnan ko, binalikan ko yung DepEd curriculum. Ano yung mga kakayahan na dapat matutunan ng bata sa pag-aaral ng itong bahagi ng ating kasaysayan. So, I just encircled the main verbs. Nasusuri, under nasusuri, naiisa-isa, nakabubuo ng konklusyon. Natatalakay, naiisa-isa, natatalakay. Naiisa-isa. Then, nabibigyang halaga. Okay? My concern with this nasusuri, naiisa-isa, natatalakay framework is that it encourages memorization rather than analysis. Because naiisa-isa, natatalakay, naiisa-isa, these are just recollection. Now, if you want to spot negative historical revisionism, you will not do it by memorizing. In fact, you will perpetuate it because you memorize the negatively revised or false history. What we need to battle negative revisionism is analysis. And these are the historical competencies that I think we should emphasize. Chronological awareness, production of a historical timeline, okay? Like I tried to show you, not because we want to memorize when. I didn't show, if you go back to my timeline of Enrique's change of mind, I didn't do that so that you would memorize on what date, place, but I wanted to show you how events unfolded. And that's important in history, yung chronological awareness. That's important in understanding the accuracy or lack of accuracy of a historical account. Fact and opinion. Ang tinuturo lagi natin ay dapat, anyway, yung differentiate between fact and opinion. That is basic. Pero para sa akin, mas mahalaga yung how do you evaluate an opinion. Kasi ang ayaw kong ugali ngayon, ang umiiral ngayon yung ganitong ugali. Eh, opinion naman yan eh. May karapatan naman siyang magbigay ng opinion. So, pare-pareho lang. We were talking about evaluating opinions, historical literacy and comprehension. Historical literacy is different from ordinary literacy. Ordinary literacy, you open the telephone directory, for those of us who still remember that. You open it, you look at the name, address, telephone number. But historical literacy, we don't look at the name, address, number first. We ask, who wrote this? Why did he or she write it? So we have to understand the intention of the author in producing the document, looking at the historical context, understanding the use of the words, the impact of the document. Students should be able to infer, they should be able to analyze cartoons, analyze perspectives, and so on. I'm sure these are competencies you're familiar with. This is a typical kind of test you will see in the textbook. But this is supposed to be an improvement because it's not just name or date. It tries to probe into causes. Ipinoklamang batas militar upang di umano'y whatever, blank. Batay sa probisyon ng blank ay may kapangyarihan ng Pangulo na magdeklara ng batas militar and so on. This is a typical, okay? It makes some effort to ask for causes of events, but it's not clear how by filling in these blanks that would lead the student to higher order competencies, which is what we always should strive for. Forming judgments. For example, look at this. This one I found in another textbook. This one seems much better. The students not only state whether they like or do not like the events that are listed, but also to explain why. I like the part where the students must explain why. Okay. And then historical literacy. I found this in a textbook. 3 sentences comprise 1 paragraph, so I broke down each sentence. And then how do we explain it? So naging isang hamon sa pamumuno ni Pangulong Marcos ang pagtatag ng bagong lipunan. Bakit? Ano ba yung bagong lipunan? Bakit ito bago? Paano ito naiba sa luma? Kailangan ba ito? So this is the underlying element of understanding the statement from a historian's perspective. Pinahayag ng Pangulo na adhikan niyang palitan ng lumang lipunan, nabalot ng katiwalian, kagulangan, etc., etc. Okay? At hindi pagkakasundo ng mga militante at militar. Okay? My question is, bakit? Sino ba yung Pangulo nung panahon ng lumang lipunan? Hindi ba si Ginoong Marcos din yun? Because that was his first term as president. Kung ganoon nga ang mga problema, bakit niya pinabayaan? Sino yung gumagawa ng quote, katiwalian, kaguluhan? Bakit sinasabing mababa ang moralidad sa serbisyong pampubliko? Sino ba dapat ang mga siwa nito? Sino yung mga quote, militante? Bakit ganoon ang tawag sa kanila? At bakit hindi sila nakakasundo sa militar? Ano ba talaga ang mga problema nung dekadang yun? And then the last sentence is para lutasin ang mga suliranin, etc. Ito binuo ni Pangulong Marcos. So my questions here would be, ano ang mga ito, para kanino, at sino ang nakinabang? These are examples of what I call historical literacy. 3 sentences that comprise 1 paragraph in a textbook, but this is how I would break it down to analyze and ensure that the students understand, comprehend the statements in the textbook. So, looking at fact and opinion, not all opinions are equal. All opinions must be weighed in light of the evidence. Ayaw natin yung tinatawag na moral relativism. All views are okay. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is correct. Why? Because they're all opinion. Everyone is entitled to that. Okay? So all opinions are okay. No. Not all opinions are okay. Some are credible. Others are not credible. I'll give you an example. Sa isang unit, kita nyo yung babae at lalaki nag-uusap. Ito yung nakasulat doon, yung babae, Danel. May mga nagpo-protesta laban sa pagdeklara ng batas militar sa Mindanao. That's referring to 2017. Marawi. Mayroon din namang sumasang-ayon sa ginawa ng Pangulo, referring to Duterte. Ano-ano kaya ang kadahilanan? Yung lalaki si Enzo sagot, tiyak na may sarili silang dahilan. Maaring ang iba may masamang karanasan noon sa batas militar. Iba naman marahil naniniwala mas nakabubuti ito, no? Habang hindi pa natitiyak na hindi mauulit ang nangyari sa Marawi. So mabuti pa pag-aralan natin. Okay. So the questions here are, nagpoprotesta, sumasang-ayon, may sariling dahilan, may masamang karanasan. These are all opinions. Okay? Mas nakabubuti. These are all opinions. So after reading this introduction, I thought the textbook, that unit, would be an exercise in establishing the facts, number 1, and then not only differentiating these facts from opinion, but more importantly, evaluating these opinions on the basis of facts or on the basis of available evidence. Instead, this is what the textbook said. Ang sumusunod ay mga pangyayaring nagbigay daan, exactly what I showed you earlier. So, the textbook missed an opportunity, A, to state the facts. As I explained earlier, these are partial truths. To develop competence in differentiating fact from opinion, and in training students to evaluate the opinions. Source analysis, I saw this in a textbook. Ginamit yung proclamation, excerpt ng Proclamation 1081, at pina-analyze ito. I think this is a good exercise. I like it. But these 4 steps must be taken. Number 1, mahaba yung proclamation. You have to select an appropriate excerpt. Appropriate to the age group, to the grade level, appropriate to the competencies that you want the students to develop.
We have one question,
Okay.
Dr. Jokno.
Yes,
Let me read
please.
it. This is from Mr. Carlos Joaquin.
Yep.
Sa tingin ko po,
Oo.
isang hamon para sa mga guro ng kasaysayan/AP ay gawing nuanced yet comprehensive enough para sa mga mag-aaral ang mga historical details na pinag-aaralan. Mayroon po bang mga practical na paraan para ma-achieve yung balance na ito?
Okay. Salamat, Carlos. Okay, meron, no? Actually, yung mahaba kasi yung slides ko, but
what we really need are sessions on training sa competencies. Kasi yung sa akin, yung content, wala namang perfect na textbook. Kahit maganda, you know, historians are that way. We'll always find something. So sa akin, I can live with the imperfection. But if we teach the competencies correctly, if we're not contented or masyado sa tingin natin one-sided or hindi or unfair na or false yung pinapakita sa textbook, kailangan magdagdag tayo ng nararapat at sapat na impormasyon.
Doc, let's proceed to our next question.
Okay.
The next question is by Miss Maluluis Cruz.
Yeah.
Are these historical competencies, or have these historical competencies been submitted to DepEd? How does the National Historical Institute work with DepEd?
Okay, 2 questions. Are these historical competencies with the DepEd? Yes. Unfortunately, ang nangyari sa DepEd, kung babasahin nyo yung buong dokumento ng curriculum sa Araling Panlipunan, sa unang bahagi, nakalista doon lahat ng mga kakayahan na dapat matutunan ng bata. Maganda, alam ko yon because I helped write it. But when you go to the last part of the curriculum, kung saan nakadetalye by unit yung paksa, tapos sa kabilang yung pamantayan sa nilalaman, tapos pamantayan sa kakayahan, yun kulang. Parang nakalimutan nila yung mga naunang competency sa umpisa ng dokumentong yon, kung saan na isa-isa lahat ng mga competencies na ito. Pero if you read the first part, makikita nyo yon. I think it has to be incorporated into the latter part of that document. How does the NHI work with the DepEd? It doesn't. We work with them only if the DepEd asks for help, or the NHI can initiate moves with the DepEd in terms of the curriculum, etc. We can suggest, but the decision making, of course, wala yan sa NHCP. Ang decision making ay nasa DepEd. So kung gusto nila makinig, okay. Kung ayaw, except in the resolution of facts. Let's say, kung saan yung unang misa, kung saan yung first shot ng Philippine-American War, yung mga ganong historical controversies. Once the NHCP makes a decision, that is upheld.
Okay. Ma'am Ever, can you hear us now, Miss Ever?
Hi, Brother Melo. Hi po, Doc Mary.
Hi,
I apologize po for the technical difficulty. No?
Kami
Actually,
rin.
kinabahan ako sa technical difficulty.
Dito rin, huwag ka mag-alala. Pareho tayo. Dito rin.
Anyway po,
patas tayo.
so let me continue po. No? Thanks for Brother Melo for pitching. No? So I'll be reading now the question po from Miss Estrella. Ang sabi po niya, critical ang AP. Very informative na ito, lalo yung laman na pang araw-araw natin at ginagawa sa kabuhayan. So actually, hindi po, parang komento po niya ito. And then, Miss Agnes Narag
I agree
said,
with you, Estrella.
ay, opo. Paano i-handle ng teacher ang conflicting o opposing political views or opinion sa klase, lalo pat laganap ang factual misinformation. So, yun po.
I like your question, Agnes. It's very good. Number 1, okay. Conflicting views in history are good. Okay, kasi part of isa sa mga mahalagang kakayahan sa history is yung critical na pagtatanong, critical na pagsusuri. Ayaw natin yung basta tanggap-tanggap ka lang or what. No, kailangan mag-isip. So kung may conflicting views, historians don't always agree. I can live with that. Ang importante is, what does the teacher do? First, we have to ask, ano yung basehan ng iyong pananaw? So kung may dalawa silang hindi nagkakasundo, my question would be, okay, ikaw, ayan ang point mo. Okay, tingnan natin, ano yung basehan ng iyong pananaw? O ikaw, ganyan. Ganun. So, saan mo nakuha yung impormasyon? Ganyan. Yung isa naman. Okay. As I listen to their answers, if they are important sources that they did not consult, I would say, napansin ko, lahat ng mga binasa mo, interesting, pero medyo one-sided. Nabasa mo ba ito? Then I would My intervention will help give additional information. Kung ano yung ibang impormasyon na dapat nakonsulta o nabasa ng bata upang makabuo ng mas credible or kapanipaniwala na pananaw. So, okay lang yung mag-differ, but we have to ask, number one, ano yung basis ng kanilang views. Number two, minsan kasi may ad hominem eh. Di ba katulad ng pinakita ko kanina sa slide? Yun talagang out of the question yan. Ad hominem, that's not historical. We don't allow that. Okay. Number two, we also have to make sure that when they oppose each other or differ in their views, they must be civil and polite and respectful. We do not tolerate any kind of personal, ganyan ang isip mo kasi makaganyan ka, makaganyan. No. You enter into the realm of the personality or what, then you are drifting away from the issue. Always stick to the issue. Totoo yung sinasabi mo, Agnes, maraming mga fake information. Kaya kung itatanong natin saan mo nakuha yan, doon natin malalaman kung credible o hindi yung kanyang sources. Minsan sa Facebook, di ba, yung iba sa Viber, share ng share, forward ng forward, fake pala yung pino-forward. Kailangan basahin mo, tingnan. I've received that and I often correct, this is a fake website. You have to check. There is a US Library of Congress website that tells you how to evaluate websites. In my class, I teach that. Kasi ang mga estudyante minsan online, doon check. Tapos kung anong nakita kasi online, ibig sabihin tama, correct. No, kailangan ma-evaluate din yung website. Kasi minsan, may political agenda. Ba't mo paniniwalaan? Lagi. I mean, kahit na may political agenda, okay, let me clarify. Kahit na may political agenda, you still examine, may basis ba yung sinasabi? May basis ba? May ebidensya ba siyang pinapakita? Kapanipaniwala ba ang ebidensyang ito? Yun. So those are the questions we would ask. And if you approach it that way, students will eventually learn to think in a very critical way.
I agree din po, Doc. Dagdagan ko rin po yung nangyari in my class.
Okay.
That we have to corroborate some facts po. Kasi
Yeah.
apparently, one is a relative of Aguinaldo. Then we're discussing about the death of Bonifacio. So,
Yeah.
naging heated debate po siya. Pero yun nga po, by looking into different perspectives of these authors, sila rin po mismo, Doc, nahimay din po ng mga bata. Then, it's an open-ended question. Then, our discussion ended na it may not resolve po kung ano yung debate, pero sa opinion ng mga estudyante, mas nagiging malakas po yung kanilang paninindigan kung ano yung tinatayuan nilang stand. So maganda rin po siyang diskusyon sa mga mag-aaral. Opo. So basahin ko naman po yung tanong ni Mary Louie Cruz. Sabi po niya, can we say that our generation from 80s to 2000s were all victims of historical revisionism? What are the steps that you may suggest that DepEd should do?
All right. When we analyze the textbooks before the K-12, we were really unhappy. We were a group of historians sa department ko sa UP, History Department. These were the old textbooks before K-12. We were very unhappy. And the DepEd knew it because we invited them, we presented our study, we explained. So, and we pointed out exact examples, ang dami-dami, no? Pati yung mga exercises na pinagagawa sa mga estudyante, ganun-ganun. We pointed that out. So, maybe not enough attention was given before to textbooks kasi mayroon ding attitude ang ilang mga guro na basta nasa textbook tama. Yun ang sabi ng mga estudyante ko sa UP kasi sabi ko nung high school kayo paano nyo inaral ito ganyan. And they said, they even cited the example na ma'am sinabi na namin na mali pero sabi ng teacher hindi bale yan ang nasa textbook yan ang ating susundin. So there is that sense and we all know that the textbooks aren't perfect. The textbooks are authored by human beings who also can make mistakes. So, ang burden is really on the teacher. Alam natin yung nilalaman ng textbook, pero alam din natin kung ano yung maaari pa nating ayusin or dagdagan or hamunin sa textbook. So I don't want to generalize and say you were all reared in historical revisionism, because remember that the classroom is not the only way to know history. Remember kanina yung pinakita kong sabi ng estudyante, sinabi daw ng matanda sa kanya, paano mo alam yung martial law, hindi ka pa pinanganak? Bakit ka umu-oppose? Ganun. Sabi niya, kayo, wala naman kayo sa Bethlehem. Paano nyo alam na pero lagi nyo pinagdiriwan ng Pasko? Okay. In other words, experience is not the only way to know history. So how do we know it? We learn it in school. We can learn it through classmates, through peers. We can learn it from adults. We can learn it from neighbors. We can learn it from anyone, media. But that's why my emphasis, unfortunately, this requires a talagang workshop type of training, is on competencies. Kasi kung magaling yung competence, kahit anong isubo mong content, mahuhuli, makikita, masusuri ng mabuti. Pero kung mahina yung training sa competence, madaling maloko yung tao. Kasi usually ang competence, chinek din namin yung mga exercises sa textbook. Sasabihin, nilalayo ng unit na ito na suriin, ganyan-ganyan. Suriin, tingnan nyo yung exercise, end of textbook, end of unit, gawain. Panay memorize. So, saan yung pagsusuri doon? Hindi nagtutugma yung sinasabi, magsusuri, but in the end, ang bagsak noon, kasi I have a project now where we're examining current textbooks. Not yet yung DepEd kasi I haven't received the grade 6, but some of the private school textbooks. But we're not only looking at the textbooks, tinitingnan namin yung lesson plan ng teachers at saka yung periodic test. Diyos ko, yung mga periodic test, halos memorization lang ang hinihingi. So kung memorization, ibig sabihin, base yan sa textbook. So kung mali ang textbook, i-perpetuate mo lang yung mali. Mali na nga, tapos ipinamemorize mo pa, walang analysis. Kaya sa akin, importante yung competence. Yung, kung ako yung magtuturo ng araling panlipunan, I'm going to change entirely the assessment instrument. I'll not use any of that. Not at all. The last part of my slides were examples of what I would use, but unfortunately, there's something wrong here, hindi maipakita. But I was going to show you samples of how to teach the competencies. But that's really a workshop. When I used to teach that to teachers, kailangan workshop style. Mahirap yung sa isang session ituturo mo lahat. But
Pandemic will be over. We hope to invite you for a workshop.
Yeah.
Mag-series of workshops na po yan, Doc, no? Opo, pag ano.
Kaya interactive din eh. Kasi yung mga workshop ko, I make the teachers do something. I mean, the teachers do the activity.
I actually
And then
experienced one, Doc, opo, when in Lasal Green Hills, when I was a teacher in grade school, we actually together po as a department, opo, na-experience ko po yan firsthand po from you. Then you ask us to make a demo lesson plan. Then we are divided into groups, tapos may parang team teaching. So, na-experience ko po yan, Doc. Opo.
Yeah.
Ayan, sige po. So let me read naman po. I think the question po of Romualdez Cumia is a follow-up of the previous question. Sabi po niya, how can the National Historical Commission intervene with the DepEd and even with the publishing companies so that the history to be published and taught will be based on facts and truth?
Okay. There are several ways several things the Historical Commission can do. Number one, it can conduct its own review of the textbooks. Certainly yung DepEd textbook. Kasi sa private school, may konting autonomy ang mga private schools na pumili ng textbook nila. No? Pero the NHCP can review the DepEd textbooks. So sa review na yon, lalabas ang mga rekomendasyon. Maganda ito. Like kanina, I showed you some examples that I like. No? So, yung iba, they have to be corrected. So that's one. Then based on that review, it can present its recommendations to the DepEd. It can propose to the DepEd on that basis na siguro bago i-circulate or tanggapin ang isang textbook, maganda sana kung ipa-review muna ito. No? Tapos, pag okay, then the problem is, Ronulfo, sasabihin ng DepEd sa atin na meron silang sariling reviewer. Dati kasi alam ko merong ganon. Lahat ng mga textbook proposals na pumapasok, pinare-review nila. Okay? So, I suppose it depends kung sino yung reviewer. Pero kung gusto mo ang tanong is, paano ang work ng historical commission, yun ay isa. Na sila mismo ang mag-review, sila mismo ang maghain ng rekomendasyon sa DepEd, sila mismo ang mag-propose. Ano kaya kung bago kayong mag-endorse ng anumang historical material, ipa-check nyo sa amin, ganon. Of course, you cannot impose because that's a different agency. But surely you can take these steps. Matrabaho lang. Matrabaho mag-review kasi kami hindi pa tapos, nag-review pa. Yeah.
Continue ko lang po. Another question po from Ronulfo Baclas. May I ask po if you could share us your strategies on how to
Yeah.
develop more teaching style in history to be more meaningful to our students?
Oh, as I said, that's a workshop. Well, basically kasi, history is the subject. Sa UP, anyway, ewan ko sa inyo. Sa UP, is the subject that students love to hate. Pinaka-hate yan. When I ask my students, but I don't ask them, do you like history? Assume ko na they hate it. So ang unang tanong ko, how come you don't like history? This is in our general education class. Malamang sinasabi nila, ma'am, kasi pinamememorize lang sa amin yan. So after the unit test, nalimutan na nila. Walang saysay, walang relevance sa buhay nila. Bilang individual o bilang member ng komunidad, walang saysay, walang relevance. No? That's one. They don't like it because ma'am, it's we are made to memorize. Now, those who like it, you know why they like it? Ang galing ng teacher ko, ma'am. Those in my class who said, Ma'am, I love history. Why? My teacher was so good. She made history exciting. She showed us how relevant it is to our everyday life. So, ma'am, history became my favorite subject. So, anong makukonclude natin? Like it or not, fellow teachers, the love or hatred for history rests on our ability or inability to teach it well, to teach it well. Kung magaling tayo, students will like it. Okay? So, having said that, one of the strategies in teaching history is always to be able to relate it to their lives today. For example, yung early period, yung bago pa dumating ang Espanya. So, I had a student who made kwento na nung nag-e-sports siya, laro-laro ng basketball sa kalye, hindi daw siya gumagaling-galing. So, hanggang umabot na sa pumunta siya sa albularyo, may pinainom, may ritual na ginawa. Yung pala, sabi daw, dahil naglaro siya, nung tinapon niya yung bola, tumama sa puno, doon daw sa puno, may paniniwala na may nakatira doon whatever, at kung sino man yung espiritu na nakatira doon sa puno, nagalit sa kanya, nagkasakit siya. Ganon. So, kailangan siya gumawa ng ritual. Ganon. So, I listened to his story. He said, niniwala ka ba? He said, yes, ma'am. I said, bakit? Ma'am, kasi gumaling ako. Yan ang sabi niya. Lahat ng ginawa namin noon, hindi ako gumagaling, lumalala. Pero after I did that, tapos sumunod ako sa sabi nila, inumin ito, magpahid ng ewan ko, gumaling ako. Then another student, ma'am, totoo pa rin yan. Doon sa amin naniniwala pa rin kami sa ganyan. So, I'm talking 21st century, people still believe. Then, I made them read an excerpt written in the 1600s. Of course, in English na kasi originally in Spanish. An excerpt precisely about that, but written by a Spanish priest. Siyempre, ang tingin ng mga Spanish priest, that is all, that's all pagan, it's all the work of the devil, because of course they're Catholic, no? They don't believe in nature spirits, but these were the beliefs that Filipinos had in the 1500s, 1400s, and earlier. No, we believed in this. So, when they read it, nakarelate sila because that's what we discussed in class, and I said, okay, ito ay isang document na sinulat ng isang pari, dumating siya ng ganitong panahon, then sinulat niya lahat ng mga karanasan niya nakita. So, that strategy was very effective. And I think how do you make the 1500s and 1600s relevant? It was so long ago. It was one historian wrote, title of his book, The Past is a Foreign Country. Kasi it's so alien. Lagi, ay, panahon niya ng mga magulang, ng mga lola, mga ninuno. Ah, wala pa ako noon. Hindi na yan, ano. So the challenge to the teacher is always, how do we bring it closer to their lives? So we have to be creative. We have to think of ways to relate. I want to answer the question of Bonifacio.
Opo,
Bonifacio
why
Habilion. Yeah,
historical
may I answer your question,
interpretation change over
Bonifacio?
time?
Why do historical interpretations change over time? Okay, I love that question because it talks about the nature of history. In history, the term history has three meanings. Meaning one is, history ay yung nakaraan. Okay? Nakaraan yon. Sabihin natin, nakita mo pala yung ex mo, ha? Sagot, ay nako, forget it, that's history. Meaning, it's the past. Tapos na yan. That happened. The second meaning of history is an account of that past. An account, a narrative. Now remember, is the account of the past always the same as the past? Of course not. Tingnan natin ang martial law. Ano yung account? Depende kung sino nagkikwento. Kung sino nag-i-interpret. In other words, the nature of history is such that we have, the first meaning is kung anong nangyari. The second meaning is an account na nangyari. If I tell my students, okay, assignment, manood kayo ng concert. Okay, kung 3 po sila sa klase ko, can I expect 30 identical accounts of the concert? Of course not. There are 30 people, they'll write 30 different accounts. So I ask my students, oh, why will your stories be different? Pareho naman yung pinanood ninyo. And of course, the answers depend. Kung saan ka nakatayo, nakaupo. Kung nakaupo ka sa harap, yung isa nakaupo sa bleachers, kung malayo-layo, hindi mo na halos makita. Or kung saan ka nakaupo, nandun yung malaking speaker, so hindi mo rin makita yung stage. Or there are many factors that explain why your accounts might not be the same. The third meaning of history is the study of history, which is what we historians do. So there is the past, account of the past, and the study of the past. Now, when you say why interpretations change, you are really referring to accounts. Why do historical accounts change over time? Simple. Historical accounts are written within a particular context. For example, when Rizal wrote his account of the Philippines, he wrote that in the 1890s, 1880s. That was a different situation. So pati yung mga reference points, etc., would be referring to incidents, people, events of his time. Now, somebody writing about Rizal now might not have the same account as what Rizal wrote, because you're writing it now in a different era. And remember, at that time, Rizal was lucky. He was alive while he was writing. So, he was what you call a primary source. Siya mismo naging testigo sa pangyayari. Tayo, we have to rely on Rizal and others who were alive at that time to tell us what was going on. So historical interpretations change because because in sometimes accounts also respond to present situations. Now, what I don't like is when you make an interpretation, your interpretation subordinates your interpretation to the fact. I mean, subordinates the fact to your interpretation. No. Facts remain facts, regardless of the interpretation, regardless of how you use it. Facts should remain facts. So, when you subordinate the fact to your interpretation, that's wrong. That's not even history. That's bad history. That's fake history. Because history must be grounded on fact, on evidence. If I do not know, if I am not sure, what I say as a historian is, well, I can't say it for a fact, but there is some evidence to suggest na ito yun. Ganito yung nangyari. But I cannot tell my students, as a fact, yan ang nangyari. Kung wala akong ebidensya, bawal yon. Unethical. Ang dapat kong sabihin, I don't have evidence. However, may ebidensya, okay, some evidence that suggests na ganito. But is that evidence definitive? Hindi pa. We have to research pa some more. That is the ethical way of dealing. So when you say historical interpretations change, another reason why they change over time is because sources emerge. For example, at the time that you did your research, hindi pa available yung source. Yung tinukoy ko ng mga record ni Marcos. Alam mo, kung ginawa yung research before, nung classified pa yan, wala tayong magawa. Walang access eh. So, paano mo alam kung tunay ba, peke ba yung record, yung medal, yung ranko? Wala. Sinong may access? State Department lang. Ngayon, nung declassify, naging accessible, then may access na tayo. So, ang interpretation mo, magbabago. Why? Kasi may bagong lumitaw na sources na 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, hindi accessible sa publiko. Ganon, yun na isa ring dahilan kung bakit nag-change over time. It has nothing at all to do with the historian. It could be with the accessibility to archives. Like, I tell my students, pag gagawa kayo ng research, sasabihin ko, okay, kailangan nyo isubmite yung papel sa loob ng isang semester. I tell them, please, huwag naman kayong pumili ng subject matter na kailangan pumunta pa kayo sa Espanya para mag-research dahil walang katapusan ito. Kailangan pumili ng paksa na mariresearchan, matatapos, mabubuo sa loob ng nakalaang panahon. Kung isang semester, tiyakin na available ang mga sources sa library, etc. So that's I hope I explained that answer.
Opo, Doc. Very comprehensive po. Sumasang-ayon po ako dun sa sinasabi nyo na kaya ang pagtuturo ng kasaysayan ay talagang challenging. Kaya masasabi na para siyang bagong luma, no? So luma man yung mga impormasyon na pero sa pag-interpret ng mga guro at sa mga ibang mga panibagong impormasyon, mas nagiging malawak po. So, dahil po rito, meron po ba kayong mga parang final po na mensahe po sa mga, lalo na sa mga millennial na guro, na kung paano pa po mas mapapayaman yung kanilang pagtuturo ng kasaysayan at paano nila maiimpluwensyahan yung mga Gen Z po, ukol dito po?
Okay, talagang malaking hamon ang pagtuturo ng batas militar. Okay? Because it's become very contentious. But me, if you're a historian, you like that. Because it's exciting. It's not boring. You'll never say it's boring. So, the first thing that the teacher has to do is, number one, we have to be well-read. At saka, ang advantage natin, many reliable sources are available online. Yung PCGG reports, these are official documents. Nobody can contest that. Yung mga alahas at na nakuha, that's a fact. Kahit sabihin ni Mrs. Marcos, diaper lang ang dala niya. Oh, you saw the video of the U.S. Customs film. No, that's a fact. These cannot be contested, and they actually have film of it. No, so yon. The teacher has to be prepared. Kailangan lagi tayong handa. Alam natin. Okay. Number two, we have to. The trick of a good historian. You anticipate all the contrary questions. Para ang history is the closest to law. Yung mga nagsasabing dapat mag-policite to take law, mali. Dapat mag-aral ng kasaysayan. It's the closest discipline. Why? In history, when we do research, we cannot research only evidence na pabor sa tingin namin. That is bad history. Sa history, kailangan tignan ng lahat ng ebidensya kay pabor o kontra sa personal mong tingin. Kaya, yung slide na ipinakita ko, nung sinusuri namin yung war record ni Ginoong Marcos, anong ginamit namin? Una, yung mga biography niya. Lahat yan pabor sa kanya. Pero ginamit namin, binasa namin. I even quoted from it and I showed you. I showed you what I quoted. No? But we cannot rely only on that. We have to look at other evidence. So, be prepared, look into contrary evidence so that you can anticipate what questions the students might ask. Kung hindi itanong ng estudyante, di ikaw magtanong para maging mas exciting yung talakayan sa sa classroom. And number 3, kailangan aware tayo that every time we discuss, let's say, a topic like martial law, umiira lagi sa kaisipan natin ano yung mga kakayahan na dapat matutunan ng bata. Hindi lang yung nilalaman ng martial law, pero yung kakayahan. Why do I emphasize that? Kasi I tell my students and teachers, lalo na teachers, I promise you will reach my age. You know, I'm 66. You will reach my age. You will not have a perfect memory anymore. Okay? But if you have all the critical competencies, you will know where to find the information, okay, how to analyze it, how to corroborate, how to relate it. You will know all of that. It will be second instinct, first instinct to you. Because you know, kahit na you might not remember every single fact, you possess the competencies. That's what I want the kids to learn. Because in the end, these children will become voters. In the end, these children will vote for people in Congress, like some of those who sponsored the crazy bills I showed. They will vote for people in the Senate. They will vote for president, vice president, etc. Okay? But aside from voting, they will make other decisions as citizens. So they have to know they need all these critical competencies upang makapagpasya sila mismo sa araw-araw na buhay. Na yung mga nagsasabi, ay masyado yung complicated sa bata. I don't believe you. You talk to 2 children. Bigyan mo sila ng 2 brand ng cellphone. Aling brand ang mas maganda? Believe it or not, memorize nila ano yung mga functions ng bawat isa. Ay, mas maganda ito, ma'am. Bakit? Kasi ito may video ganyan-ganyan. At saka yung MGB niya, ganyan-ganyan. Ito mas mabagal. Pero ito may smart, ganyan-ganyan. In other words, students know how to research. They do it when they want to buy cellphone. So I think we have to tap into that innate capacity and then develop it deeper and apply it sa mga topics that we discuss in class. Thank you.
Thank you po. So that's all po yung mga tanong. Wala na pong mga pumapasok na tanong.
Okay.
Very much po.
Salamat sa audience, and I'm sorry, with all the glitches towards the end, but thank you. Salamat din, Ever. And Brother Mel, salamat. Yes, okay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jokna, for your expertise. And thank you, Ms. Ever, for being our moderator for today's session. We also thank everyone for sharing your time with us today. It was another enriching Saturday morning with you. Please visit our Facebook page, Don Bosco Press Inc., for updates on our next projects and activities. And of course, you may also contact your SalesianaBooks account executives. You may also view the previous sessions of all the Chalk Talk online series in our YouTube channel. Just key in Don Bosco Press and hit the subscribe button. Other reminders: those who have registered for today's Chalk Talk Online will be receiving your certificates in 2 weeks' time. And you will also be receiving a recording of today's session through your emails. Lastly, please do accomplish the evaluation survey at the end of this session to help us serve you better. So again, thank you for joining us today. This is Tina De Guzman thanking you, and until next time.
Quality education through quality textbooks.